Last week I read an article about Viagra, the erectile dysfunction drug. It's one of the most successful drugs of all time and has made its owners, Pfizer, over $400 million since its launch in 1998. However, that period of massive profits looks likely to come to an end as the patents that protect the drug and give Pfizer exclusivity are due to wear out. That means they'll be facing stiff competition from competitors using the same technology in competing generic products. This prompted me to think maybe we should have a look at the pharmaceuticals market as a whole. It's a really complicated, really fascinating market that shows a lot of examples about how behaviours of businesses can change depending on a lot of different circumstances around, for instance, regulation, pricing, and how society is looking at your market. So let's think about the basics of the pharmaceuticals industry. Firstly, creating a new drug is an extremely long-winded and expensive process. You've got to develop the drug, then you've got to prove it works, then you've got to prove to the regulators that it's safe to be used, and eventually you've got to market and bring it to the customers. With all the huge expense of the upfront costs, pharmaceutical companies who are profit-making companies need to get their money back. So the way that's typically done is through patents. Essentially, if you create the technology and get it approved, you have a clear run at the market using your drugs for a period of time. That means that you can recoup your costs by charging the kind of high level margins that perhaps if you had total competition you wouldn't be able to do. However, leaving those sort of monopolies forever is unpalatable and unfair, so eventually those patents will lapse. How long they last, how strong they are, might actually also depend on what country you're in, which markets you're in. But effectively, the system is set up so that the patents allow people to make the research in the first place. Now let's think about pricing. Clearly, the price that you charge for a product is going to be as high as you can possibly get away with. But that actually is not necessarily the same price depending on your market. For instance, if I'm a drugs company selling to the NHS or to US health insurers who are bearing the burden of the cost, I'm probably going to be able to charge a much higher price than I can to consumers in another country where the consumer is actually paying for the medicine out of their own money. So what that means is that companies are extremely secretive about the price that they're charging across the different markets to the different consumers. One thing that they're trying to avoid as well is the formation of a grey market where people are paying for a low-priced market drugs and then transferring them off to the high-priced market, so they're still making money out of it by just arbitrating between the two costs. When a medicine comes out of patent, clearly the generic goods are going to be competing on price primarily. Basically, we know what the technology is, it's just a question of who can market it best, who can actually still make a profit at those much lower levels. But there are also, conversely, an interest in new entrants to the market using this technology that's just become available to actually improve the product, to make new variations of it, to do something new with it. Something that the original patent holder, who had the monopoly, has no particular incentive to do. They're already making their money. So that period when a drug comes out actually can be a key point for innovation. Let's go back to Viagra for a minute. At the moment, the Viagra product is not necessarily perfect at all. It doesn't work for about 30% of people. The usage of it over a longer period of time tends to reduce its efficacy. It can interfere with other medicines that you are using. So all round, there is actually an incentive to create a new, perhaps completely different product to tackle erectile dysfunction. Now that Viagra is going to be cheap, conversely, it means that a new, exclusive, patented product becomes all the more attractive for companies who are looking to develop something new. So again, that's an interesting example of how the different circumstances can really strongly affect different companies' behaviour. If we look at a more macro level, let's think about drugs that we think are really, really essential. Two examples: the antiretroviral drugs that we use to treat the HIV/AIDS crisis. In developing countries, it was clear that there was no way that those countries were going to be able to afford the original patented products. However, international agreements allowed the generics to be brought to market sooner than they otherwise would have been in order to combat a world health crisis. Another example might be, what do we do if a government is absolutely crying out for a new product, for a new drug? A good example might be a new antibiotic, because the current antibiotics are potentially being eroded. So what you might see there is governments incentivising companies who otherwise think that's the upfront costs, the inherent risk in developing a new product might not be worth it. You give them better patents, you make the patents last for longer, you make them stronger and more enforceable, but the ultimate aim is you give these profit-making companies the profit incentive to get on with creating something new. So once more back to Viagra. There is a new dream molecule that the current developers are hoping that's going to be the next big thing. It's called glycerol trinitrate, and one of its great advantages is that it can be sprayed onto the affected area rather than taken orally. However, it's bound to be that there's going to be other entrants into this market, and the one universal truth is whoever actually can crack it and come up with the next product is going to be holding some massive product profits in their hands. I've got to do that one again now.